Today we have a very special guest with us again. Is
Tim Plowden.
Hello.
welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Tim is a wildlife photographer, videographer, and author of wildlife conservation and travel narratives.
Yeah. So welcome, Tim, for joining us on the show today. So maybe just very quickly, you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience on the podcast.
Yeah.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tim. I've been doing wildlife photography professionally for about 6 years now. It's kind of led into doing other things like conservation filmmaking and writing about wildlife photography and some of my experiences in the field as well, where I've encountered illegal activity and work with conservationists. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
How do you actually start your wildlife photographer, I would say photography career in that sense? Is it you started out as a kid or, how does it all come about?
So basically, I mean, I've always been interested in the outdoors and wildlife. I think had the luxury of having a father who was a really outdoorsy. He used to be a farmer and then a geography teacher.
Oh, wow.
So we lived on the edge of this area of outstanding natural beauty as well, called the Chilterns, just outside London. So we'd always go for family walks, and he would always be interpreting the landscape and what he saw, and sharing his knowledge of the outdoors with us as a family. So we've all benefited from his knowledge, and some of my family have gone into those kind of outdoorsy careers as well. One of my brothers is in conservation, for example. So that kind of triggered, I guess, a series of interests and opportunities. Primary school as well, junior school, we had a conservation corner. So I got involved in that. I volunteered for that, and that was great. I got into bird watching when I was quite young, and that exposed me, I guess, to beautiful wildlife photography images, bird photography images from some of the UK professionals at a young age. And then I guess as a teenager, I kind of got interested in things that teenagers get interested in. And then later on in life, I got back into conservation. And at the same time as doing conservation work, I was doing some photography, wildlife photography. So there's always been this kind of two tracks I've kind of been interested in. One is conservation, and then the other is like the creative side, wildlife photography, and they help each other. And so basically, when I was doing conservation work, I learned about wildlife behavior, which is really important as a wildlife photographer. You need to be able to understand wildlife behavior, and I think that's kind of like when I decided I wanted to be a wildlife photographer rather than be a conservation worker. I decided that wildlife photography was the thing for me.
Right.
So I could still spend plenty of time outdoors, observing wildlife, and try and sort of develop certain skills.
But have you been a freelancer? I mean, so, during your journey as a wildlife photographer, or have you been in some part engaged to the company?
So basically, I mean, before I became a full-time wildlife photographer, I was doing freelance work in the corporate sector. So I've been a freelancer most of my life, to be honest. Even when I was a student, I was doing temp work, right? So I understand that kind of economy and what it takes to survive in that world. And so that's kind of my background is basically I'm a freelancer through and through, and I love freelancing. I love the benefits it gives you and the opportunities it gives you to have a skill set which is valued, and you get paid for the skills that you have, and that's a great feeling that,
So if let's say some of the some of our young photographers in Singapore who is actually looking to start up as a wildlife photographer, what kind of qualification or what kind of advice will you give to them, to start this career?
I don't think there's any one entry point to being a wildlife photographer. I mean, some of the people I know back home have, they've been like labourers. Some of them, they come from a very humble background, and it's something that they really want to pursue. Others may be coming from a more academic background as well. So there's no one way. I think the most important thing is to understand the wildlife that you're photographing, to understand the tools that you're using, the photography equipment, and maybe even be innovative with that as well. Sometimes that's what can set you apart, is using like new ways of doing things. And then I think thirdly, if you're trying to really establish yourself seriously in the profession, then you need to really develop your creative style and have a vision of where you want to achieve with your work. So
So what are some of the preparation that you always do before your trip to a area, to do your wildlife photography? What kind of preparation would you have in place?
Yeah, so I would, if I'm working with an organization, for example, then we would plan logistics. So where we're going, where and how long for, it's that kind of stuff. What are we going to photograph or film? Who we need to speak to. If we're going to be doing interviews with organizations or other individuals in the community, that kind of thing. And then obviously kind of what habitat you're going into. Is it tropical rainforest? Is it mangrove? Or is it more mountainous? So you need to maybe prepare yourself physically for some of these challenges. I've been in up the Himalayas in Yunnan a few times, and there aren't really footpaths there, and you're kind of like swinging through the trees pretty much. So the bamboo groves is a bit entertaining. But so you've got to be physically fit as well. And so I do regularly exercise, so it's important.
I think that's important for every freelancers as well. Health is important.
It is. And then if it's a subject, often I'll be traveling somewhere to photograph a subject I've not photographed before or filmed, so you have to try and study a bit about the animal's behavior. If you're working with a organization who are researching that species, then that really helps because they'll have the local knowledge about the species, and that will give you opportunities which you may not be able to get in terms of photographing or filming that subject if you went on your own, because you wouldn't know where to go and the animals maybe are frightened of you. But if you go and work with researchers, then they will have habituated the animals, so that's really that's helpful. I think it's a bit of study, logistics, shot list is essential.
How about protection? What kind of protection would you ensure that so that you will go there with a peace of mind, or your family will go there with a peace of mind too?
Mosquito repellent. That's one of the biggest annoyances, I guess, are mosquitoes and leeches. Usually, those are the worst. I mean, I've had socks filled with leeches before. That's pretty gross. And you take your sock off and blood pouring out. I've never had problems with snakes.
Okay.
I've photographed in Alaska with the brown bears there, and I went to some places where there were I got a friend actually who's a bear wrangler, they call them. So in Katmai National Park, so they help manage the situation of any sort of bear-human conflict, or between, you don't want to get stuck between two bears who are
about to fight.
Which is a very densely populated bear area. So you have to be quite careful, and it's quite nerve-wracking, and you don't really want to go on your own. Walking alone, so you usually have to partner up with somebody, but you do get help on terms of they give you an introduction to bear safety and stuff like that. But before I went to that place, when I was in Alaska, I was in other areas where there were black bears, which are equally potentially dangerous. And so you just have to use common sense, really. Don't run around and make a noise is a good thing, and walk slowly and look for signs as well. Like the first time I saw black bears up close, I saw this salmon carcass, and it gave me an indication that it wasn't just, when you go to Alaska, there's salmon carcasses everywhere because they're just salmon runs, but there's one which had been brought out, and I could tell that it had been sort of half eaten by a bear. And sure enough, over the river or stream, there was a black bear appeared with some of her cub, which is probably the most dangerous thing you can encounter. So fortunately, there was a river between us. But you just have to be really prudent, I think, and not antagonize any animals. National parks here are pretty good at the notices they leave, and say Pasir Ris Park, pretty sensible stuff if you follow that kind of guidelines about, if you encounter a wild boar or an otter, what do you do? And those kind of things are, pretty broad. You can apply them to many animals, and just don't stare at them. That's the main thing. eye contact with a wild animal is pretty bad, so you don't do
Oh,
that.
okay, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought if there's eye contact, so that's calmness, you
No.
kind of...
Same as
Alright.
children. Don't look at them.
Yeah, so you could try that with macaques if you like. And, then if you, they'll charge at you. I've done that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, have you ever encountered really a very dangerous situations during your career as a wildlife photographer?
Yeah.
Life-threatening?
Yeah, potentially. I had a leopard charge me in Africa. Yeah, that was quite fun.
How do you get yourself out of the situation?
Well, yeah, it was eating an elephant calf.
Oh.
Carcass was pretty tragic, yeah. But it was dry season, so a lot of sort of elephants do suffer then, sadly. And what happened was that the lady next to me wanted to get a better picture because she wasn't right next to the scene. And I was on the edge of this game viewing vehicle and getting great shots, obviously. And her movement
Right.
is what you're not supposed to do.
Okay.
So
because the sudden movement.
It completely spooked out the leopard.
Right.
And the leopard stopped eating, growled, and just charged at me because I was the one in the line of fire. Unfortunately, the guy who was driving
Right.
was a very experienced guide, great guy, local, like Botswana guy, and he managed to scare off the leopard, which was great because it was only like a few feet away from me in the end.
What did he do?
I think he just made some noise and stuff like that. I mean, I wasn't really
okay.
paying attention because there was a leopard charging at me. But as soon as the leopard snarled, I didn't take any pictures of that.
Okay.
I knew something was wrong,
Okay.
so I wanted to make sure the leopard could see me
Right.
as well, and I could see the leopard,
Right.
rather than sort of the last thing. I didn't want the last thing to be a picture of a leopard, charging at me. So. But I think, those are quite serious. I think in India there's a lot of issues with leopard-human conflicts. So you've got to be quite careful, and they're quite widespread. And they're not, you get them in cities and stuff like that, even in Africa. So, they're quite dangerous. I've had some close encounters with snakes, but they usually, they're not too, I don't really handle them, so they're okay. I've almost been pounced on by a horny deer. I don't know if we can say that, but it was in the rutting season back home, and I was using these calls to mimic the sound of a female deer in season, in estrus, as they say, and it was really effective. And it was this buck just leapt out of the undergrowth and almost, trampled me. So that was fun.
I see that you are very focused in your line of work, but unfortunately a lot of freelance photographers in Singapore, they are not able to do that. So, they do like corporate shoots, weddings, and a lot of things like that. How important is it for a freelancer to be able to find their niche?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's very important. I mean, you can't really carve out a career unless you are specialised in that sense. I've had to fall back on doing some corporate gigs, particularly as a parent, freelancer has really helped. And when I've not really been able to travel in the last couple of years, then that's really helped, doing some work locally. But yeah, I think you need to make a reputation, and if you don't have that reputation as a specialised, say, wildlife photographer, you won't get hired as a wildlife photographer. You'll always kind of, I guess, be kind of like juggling your main job with doing some wildlife photography in your spare time, and I think that's the challenge, I think, for some of the guys I know locally, and they're doing, like, say, corporate gigs, and then when they've got free time, they'll be doing some wildlife photography. So, it doesn't detract from the quality of their work because they're great wildlife photographers. It just means it's harder, and it's not easy being a wildlife photographer in terms of it's very competitive. A lot of people want to do it. The money isn't great. Opportunities are quite limited as well. The market is definitely there in Europe, and especially in the UK and the US. But in Asia, I think there's fewer magazines, there's fewer outlets for this kind of stuff. But nonetheless, if you want to do, say, conservation photojournalism or conservation filmmaking, then as a professional, in that capacity, then there's opportunity in Asia because there's a lot of work in conservation here. But that's a slightly different skill set, but nonetheless very necessary, rewarding as well. It can have a wildlife component, but I think a lot of the productions that would get done, say, for wildlife filmmaking here would probably involve sort of Western film cameramen and stuff like that. They wouldn't really go for local guys. Even some of the productions, I think, they've been filmed in Singapore about wild Singapore and stuff like that. They've used foreign talent, which I'm not sure I think is always a good thing. I think I certainly think there's a lot of talent here, and I've pushed sometimes situations. I have pushed that talent ahead of me, and I think it's always right to do work when there's local people who can do it.
Right.
That's my own thing. I do. I think it's a privilege to live in Singapore.
Thank you.
It is, and you shouldn't always just take all the work from everybody else.
So having freelancing back in the UK versus now freelancing in Singapore, do you see the difference in the two places?
I started my freelance creative career here, so I've only been a freelance photographer in Singapore.
Okay.
But my market, if you like, is more the UK and Europe, and sometimes US.
I see.
So that's where I'm coming from. It's like although my subject material is maybe, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, is more Asian specific. It's getting sold to magazines, newspapers, books, and other projects, whatever, in the West.
Right.
So, for example, my pictures of otters in Pasir-Ris have been bought by titles in Saudi Arabia,
Really?
France. I think one of the key things I guess I've learnt since coming here and being married to my wife, whose background is in sort of communications, journalism, PR, filmmaking. That's what she studied. That she really helped me to understand, I guess, the editorial side of photography and storytelling, and we worked together on some sort of blog posts when I was in Africa, and that really was a really great experience in terms of developing my my skill set.
Right.
Is like interpreting what you see, how you can try and find that connection to an audience, by telling a story, and I think that's not specific to wildlife, but if you can apply those kind of storytelling techniques to wildlife photography, it really helps to just take that subject, if you like, into a more broader, make it appeal to a broader audience, rather than if it's just something which isn't telling a story, isn't really saying anything, maybe, whether that's visually or creatively or what have you. But sometimes it could just be some action, it could be a mannerism, something of the animal is doing which is unique, or maybe sometimes I try and avoid taking comedy shots. I used to at one point when I started out. Animals do some crazy stuff sometimes and it's quite funny, but I've since kind of
stopped doing that.
When I've been reading about like kind of more ethical stuff and how wildlife should be portrayed in the media, as opposed to how it can be portrayed, and
that's true.
We have a responsibility to not to, as a wildlife photographer, you have a responsibility not to denigrate your subject. And I think that's important, that you actually want to engender respect, I think, and like maybe compassion as well, rather than just some comedy thing, and I think you can kind of write off an animal or
or the importance of the message they're trying to send.
Yeah, exactly.
So you dedicated a good 6 years of your life to wildlife photography. So what kind of changes would you hope to see, especially in the conservation area?
I think it's quite eye-opening, that there are so many risks for wildlife in the region, and it's you just think when we moved to Pasir-Ris last January, I was just doing some, my daughter was only a few months old, and I was just finished up some filmmaking in Vietnam, and it was filming some pretty grim stuff, like traps and wildlife trade and TCM, where they have the animals in jars and stuff like that. So I was pretty depressed, I think, with the state of wildlife in Vietnam. And I thought, coming to Pasir-Ris, it's great, a bit of therapy, wildlife, spend time with my daughter, and then you can't escape it, and it's wherever you are. So I think if people can be more aware, and just keep an eye out for illegal activity, that be citizen conservationists, if you like, I think, that would be a good thing, and it's particularly, say, in the Otter Watch community, that people have sort of changed from just being photographers to being, citizen conservationists by, helping rescue them, etc., or alert the authorities. So, I think that's a sign of hope that, when, photographers take it upon themselves to help with conservation on the ground. That's really important, because communities matter when it comes to conservation. That's definitely what I've seen in my work abroad, that if you don't engage local communities in conservation work, then I think it's very hard to actually be successful in conservation. And the real success stories that I've come across have involved local communities, effectively, whether that's turning former hunting communities into conservation communities that are actually guarding the forests or the species, or they're actively involved in restoration work of habitat, rather than clearing forest and converting it to aquaculture or agriculture.
So freelancing is actually quite a new concept in Singapore.
Right.
So how has your perspective of freelancing changed from the day when you started freelancing till now?
So, I think when I started freelancing I was doing IT work back in the UK, so there's a lot of freelancing there, and usually it's for a particular project, so it's a longer term project. Then I moved into doing website work and sort of website design, and also that's project based, so that can be several months. And what I've seen happen in the last few years is like this more gig, so it can be like a day or half a day, 2 hours sometimes I get, to do a shoot. Maybe it's still the same for IT and website. It's probably more like project based, but I guess it's going to depend on your specialism. Certainly stock photography itself is just, that's just you doing something off your own bat. So that hasn't really changed, I would say, in terms of how you approach it. You've just got to come up with some concepts which you're going to sell. To assignment work, I would like to see that change, I think, to like international or titles looking at local talent rather than sending someone from the UK all the way over to Asia to do some photography, or from the US. I think, obviously I understand that they have working relationships with certain photographers and stuff like that, but I do think there's plenty of talent in Asia, for example, that should be used by these titles, and why not,
Right.
And I think, and I think also local photographers need to push for it probably as well. Have the confidence and belief that they can do that. They don't need to travel to the west to do that work. They should,
But how do you think local freelancers should market themselves to international clients?
Certainly sign up with international agencies, I mean, I think there's no barrier to entry to those. You know, whether it's a stock library or an assignment agency. You know, like the ones that I'm signed up with, doesn't say you've got to be UK or American. It's like, I don't think it matters. I think you just have to take the initiative to find who they are, really. And if you're going to do some research on, you know, look at the magazines that you want to, or newspapers or organizations that you want to ideally do work for, and see, you know, when you look at the image credits, all right, it will usually say photographer name / then the stock library. So that's what I did. That's how I found out about Rex, for example. It's like some of the guys that were getting their wildlife photography published in newspapers were going via Rex. So that's what I did. Just, you know, but yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been approached by quite a well-known agency in the US called Wonderful Machine, just for a particular. There's two sides, I think, to their business. One is specific image requests, so they'll have their client base, you know, big brands in the US, whatever, multinationals, and they will have clients will have a specific image request, and they'll contact various people who aren't on their books, but maybe in a particular region. So they wanted something in Singapore, and you know, pitch something. But then the other side of their business, if you really want to do it, they have like a monthly fee of like $100, and they'll represent you. But more for maybe travel, adventure, lifestyle photography, animals in terms of animal portraiture, maybe rather than wildlife. So if adventure stuff is your gig, then yeah, definitely a good one. And lifestyles, definitely. I mean, I think lifestyle photography around nature is a good one as well for people to look at, people enjoying the outdoors.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Tim, for the candid sharing. So, before we round out, right, just one last question that we'd like to ask you. So, if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, right, when you're just starting out, what would you say?
I think to be fearless. When I was starting out, I was afraid of being judged, and I was quite self-conscious, maybe. You know, that my work wasn't good enough, or I wasn't ready. I wanted more time to make things perfect, and I don't think that was necessary. You just got to go for it, really. Believe in yourself and see where that takes you. You know, and once you start getting stuff published, and it will lead to other things. It's not always one big break, but it's one small step at a time. And just be patient. You know, I think sometimes you get this great opportunity where something is published and you expect the whole world to kind of sit at your feet, kind of where the expression is, but it's not like that. You can edit that one out, that's rubbish. But, you know, I think that, you know, I've had some great exposure, but you can't just let that, you can't sit on your laurels. You've got to keep working hard, keep learning new skills, and improving what knowledge you have. You know, and it's a constant thing, you know, and it's like, when it comes to wildlife photography, you say, like, I did this article series about behavior, and I thought I knew about behavior before I wrote it, but I tell you, I learned so much from actually writing articles where I had to really study things more in depth, and it's great. I mean, it just shows that, you know, there is still so much to learn. So just see, it's not like you're not like the end product, you're not the finished product at the beginning of your career. You're just, you know, whatever the expression is, you're like the seed which is going to grow into a tree, you know, and you just got to allow yourself to be watered, maybe. How about that?
That's great advice. Great advice.
But yeah, definitely be fearless.
Okay. So everyone, remember from Tim is to be fearless.
Particularly when you're facing a leopard or a bear.
All All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another episode for our Freelance Creative Exchange.
Subscribe to iTunes and Spotify and leave us a review.
And subscribe to our YouTube and leave a comment because we want to hear what you think. Let us know the questions or the freelancers you want to hear from.
Follow us at CreativesAtWork on Facebook and Instagram.
Join us next time for a brand new episode of Freelance Creative Exchange.
Until then, bye.
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 Bye.